Good morning. I want to welcome all of you to the Lethia Baptist Church Sunday morning enrichment hour. And this morning we'll be discussing our Sunday school lesson. Today's lesson comes out of Leviticus chapter 16, verses 1 through 16. The title of today's lesson is Day of Atonement. Now, atonement means to be reconciled, to be back in fellowship. And after a horrific incident occurred at the temple, God instituted this holy and sacred day as a means to purge and cleanse the nation of sin in order to reconcile them and to bring them back into fellowship. And the main reason is because God wanted to abide in the midst of his people. That brings us to today's lesson, which begins in Leviticus chapter 16, verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they had offered before the Lord and died. God had given specific guidelines of how the priests were to offer, sacrifices. To do otherwise was to be disobedient and to treat God as unholy. And so to make sure that Aaron wouldn't commit the same mistake, God tells Moses to warn Aaron in verse 2. And the Lord said unto Moses, Speak unto Aaron thy brother, that he come not at all times, that means anytime he chose to, into the holy place, which is in the veil before the mercy seat, which is upon the ark, that he die not. For I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. Now, he bring up three things here I want you to point out here. He bring up the veil, he bring up the mercy seat, and he bring up the ark. Now, God had given specific instructions for the nation to make the ark, because it symbolically represented his presence with the people. And the mercy seat, it was the covering of the ark, and it symbolically represented the throne of God. That's why it says here that I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. That's because it's saying it symbolically represented the throne of God. And then the veil, that was the holiest of holies. That was the holy place. It's almost like the pews there, and then there was a curtain there that separated the congregation of the tabernacle from the holy place, the holiest of holies. But then in verse 3, he's going to give specific guidelines, instructions, and all the requirements in order to observe this sacred and holy day. And it begins in verse 3 in saying, this is how you have to come into the holiest of holies. And he says, Thus shall Aaron come into the holy place, with a young bullock for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. Now, the word offering means to draw near. In order for an unholy man to draw near to a holy God, he has to bring an offering. But here's the thing here. We can't choose for ourselves. God chooses. As you see, he said, bring a bullock, they have to bring a ram. Now, the sin offering was offered as a substitute. It's when the sinner would place his hand on the animal and transfer his sins to the animal, and the animal become the substitute. And then the burnt offering was offered as a means of rededication, recommitment to God. So in order to draw near, you have to atone for your sin, which means to pay a ransom, and then you have to rededicate yourself to God. But that's something else I want you to see here, that like I said, we can't come to God on our own terms. We have to come according to his guidelines. That's why Jesus said in John 4:16, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to God except through me. So even though today we have those who try to bypass Jesus and go straight to Jehovah, we can't do that because God, the one that chooses. We don't get to choose the sacrifice, we don't get to choose the ram. God does that. And then notice the next requirement here in verse 4. And he shall put on the holy linen coat, and he shall have the linen breeches upon his flesh, and shall be girded with the linen girdle, and with the linen mitre. Now the mitre, that was the head covering. And shall he be attired. And notice the next line here. These are holy garments. Now these holy garments, because in Exodus chapter 28, God gave specific instructions on how to make the priestly garments and the materials in which they were to be made. And that signifies, in these holy garments, they signifies Aaron as his servant and as the priest. And as the priest, he was to serve as mediator. See, so in order to draw near to holy God, we have to have a mediator. That's why that was a priest necessary. But the main thing here that we're seeing is he said, put on the holy garments. And then notice here, and he shall wash his flesh in water and then put them on. In other words, like to come before a holy God, we have to prepare ourselves mentally, spiritually, and we have to come in the right spirit and with the right attitude. And that holds true for us today. When we come to worship, we need to leave all the worldly stuff outside and make sure we come to worship God in the right spirit, in the right attitude. We want to come with praises on our lips, thanksgiving in our hearts, and love on our minds, because we want to come in the right spirit and in the right attitude. And then in verse 5. Now notice this. Now notice the instructions he's going to give here, because remember, he's giving guidelines and instructions how to observe this sacred and holy day. And he shall take of the congregation of the children of Israel 2 kids or goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Now notice now, he tells them, the congregation, the nation, they have to bring 2. That's a process here, and they're going to explain this a little bit more as we go through there. But that's a valuable lesson he is teaching here. And notice he said, Aaron had to bring a bullock for a sin offering. Now he tell them they got to bring 2 for a sin offering as a substitute. See, the idea here is this, that the wages of sin is death. That's Romans 6:23. And that's why in order to draw near to a holy God, there must be a sacrifice. There must be atonement for sin. And remember, atonement means to pay a ransom. But see, and that's something I want to point out here. And if you internalize this and understand this, it'll help to see why there is just so much evil and wickedness in the culture today. See, when you read in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, you see this phrase, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, I just wonder, why was that there? But understand now that in that culture, just like it is today, there was many pagan gods. So God established himself by saying, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am holy. Now, when you look at the culture today, everybody is creating their own gods. And everybody's God does what they tell him to do. And so, but not so with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He created the universe, he gave the law, and he established the morality because he is holy. He created us in his image, and he expects for us to reflect him. In the culture today, why there's so much evil and wickedness, because everybody has created their own God, and everybody's reflecting their own God, and in essence, they're reflecting themselves. If you internalize that and understand that, you begin to see why there's just so much evil and wickedness in the culture today. In verse 6, and Aaron shall offer his bullock. Now, the word that offer means he got to sacrifice it, okay? And Aaron shall offer his bullock or sin offering, which is for himself, and make an atonement, that is to pay a ransom, for himself and for his household. Now, when he said for himself and his household, he's not necessarily talking about his personal household as he's talking about the tribe of Levi. See, God chose the entire tribe of Levi for the priestly service and for the priesthood. They are the ones that to perform all the priestly duties. And so to make an atonement, he's making an atonement for the entire tribe of Levi because they are because that's where the priesthood comes from. But the reason why, but notice what he said here, he got to offer it. I mean, it's got to die. And the reason for that is because in Hebrews 9:22, Scripture tells us that without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness. So he couldn't just go out back, lay his hand on the animal and say, I transfer my sin to you. No, it don't work like that. They got to bring the animal to the temple, to the tabernacle, and the animal has got to be slain. The animal got to die. Because the wages of sin is death. And without the shedding of the blood, there is no forgiveness. So that's the way it had to be done. And then in verse 7 here, it says, still giving instructions now how to observe this sacred and holy day. And it says, and you shall take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And verse 8, and Aaron shall cast lots upon the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord and the other lot for the scapegoat. Now, notice what he didn't tell Aaron to do. Choose one. He said, bring the 2 goats. They already selected the 2 goats. He told him not bring them to the door or the tabernacle. And then he told him to choose and cast lots. See, Proverbs 16:33 tells us that man cast a lot, but God determined the outcome. See, just like we had spoken earlier, that we can't come to the Lord on our own terms. God does the choosing. Even here we see Aaron cast a lot, but God still does the choosing. God going to determine which one is going to be the scapegoat and which one is going to be for the sacrifice. And then in verse 9, and notice it said, and Aaron shall bring the goat upon which the lot fell and offer him for a sin offering. So now you notice you got 2 goats here now. One on the lot that was set for the Lord, he's going to be offered as a substitute, as a sacrifice. That's the one that's going to pay the ransom. Then in verse 10, it says here, but the goat on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make an atonement with him, and let him go for a scapegoat into the wilderness. Now, that's a process here I want you to see. Now, the reason why he told them to select 2, because see, one that's going to be offered as a sacrifice. The other one going to be offered as a scapegoat. In other words, it's going to symbolically represent removing the sin from the nation. Okay, but we know in Hebrews. Let's see. Let me see. Okay, I'm sorry. In Hebrews 10:4, it tells us that it was impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to remove sin. That's why I got to have 2, because the blood of the animals, it was only be a substitute. It could cover sin, but it could not remove sin. That's why we had to have a scapegoat, because the scapegoat was symbolically of removing the sin. So what the blood of bulls and goats couldn't do, he got to have the scapegoat. So now, all of this here, what it does, it is foreshadowing of the work that Christ would do at the cross. When he would become our high priest, he would offer himself as a sin offering and pay the ransom for our sin. He himself will become our scapegoat and remove our sin. So all this is just basically foreshadowing of the work that Christ would do at the cross. Now, up until this point, beginning with verse 3 up to 10, God was giving specific guidelines and instructions on how to observe this holy and sacred day. But now, beginning in verse 11 through 16, we're going to see how this holy and sacred ceremony is to be performed. And beginning with verse 11, Aaron has already selected his bullock, but now notice what he tells him to do. And Aaron shall bring the bullock of the sin offering, which is for himself, and shall make an atonement for himself and for his house. And notice, and he shall kill the bullock of the sin offering, which is for himself. See, like I said, there must be shedding of blood. And see, if you look at the whole entire book of Leviticus, what you see, all the blood shed, that's the image that God is trying to press on their minds and on their hearts, that the wages of sin is death. And every single time someone sins, something had to die. And this is the image he's trying to impress through that whole book with all these sacrifices, because it's just a bloody mess. But that's what he's trying to impress, that in the minds and on the hearts, that every time someone sins, something has got to die, because the wages of sin is death. And now, so notice, he couldn't just go out back, lay his hand on the animal. No, the animal got to die. He got to kill it. And then in verse 12 here, and this is interesting here because in verse 2, he told Moses to give Aaron specific instruction not to come into the holy place, the holiest of holies, But now, what we're going to see on this holy and sacred day, he's going to enter into the holiest of holies on 3 separate occasions. And this is going to be the first here, beginning in verse 12. And he shall take the censer full of burning coal or the fire from off the altar before the Lord, and his hands full of sweet incense, beaten small, that means so to burn, and shall bring it within the veil. Now, in Exodus chapter 30, 34 through 38, God gave specific instructions how to make this holy and sacred, these incenses. And it was only to be used for anointing and cleansing. And he gave dire warning, said not to make this in any other portion, not to in any way use this for perfume to put on the body. It was only to be used for sacred ceremonies. And he said to do this, to make as a perfume to wear, he said that was a deadly consequence. You would be cut off. And so now notice here in verse 13, he said, and he shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that's upon the testimony, that he die not. See, now, they say like this, by bringing it, now this is the first time he goes into the holiest of holies. He's going to bring the incense, he's going to bring the fire, he's going to ignite it, and it's going to burn, it's going to raise up this smoke. Okay, now this smoke actually was going to cover the mercy seat. And now, some say this was a way of shielding Aaron from the glory of God, the Shekinah glory, when it descended upon the mercy seat. But that's something else I want you to see in this here. Not only does it provide a shield, but also it covered the stench of sin and death. And we know today that it's the prayers of the saint that rises up as a sweet aroma before the Lord, and that covers sins and death. That's Revelations 5:8. And said this is the first time it goes in. Now, verse 14, we're going to see this is the second time you're going to go in. Now, he has already slain his bull for his sin offering, Aaron has. And now, verse 14, and he shall take the blood of the bullock and sprinkle it with his finger upon the mercy seat, eastward and before the mercy seat shall he sprinkle the blood with his finger 7 times. Now, the reason why in other words, he's going to sprinkle blood on the mercy seat, he's going to sprinkle blood in front of the mercy seat. The reason being because he's going to sprinkle in front of the mercy seat, because once Aaron come into the holiest of holies, this is where the Shekinah glory of the Lord would descend upon the mercy seat. He is standing on holy ground. So it has to be purged and cleansed of sin. In verse 15, going to be the third time he's going to go into the holiest of holies. And then shall you kill the goat or the sin offering that is for the people, and bring his blood within the veil, and do with the blood as he did with the blood of the bullock, and sprinkle it upon the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. So now he's going to do the same thing. He's going to take, remember, they had 2. This is the one they had chose to be offered as a sacrifice. He's going to kill it. He's going to bring the blood into the sanctuary, into the holiest of holies, and they're going to sprinkle it on the mercy seat, 7 times. And notice, in both cases, he told Aaron to sprinkle his blood on the mercy seat and before, and he tell the people to take that sin off and sprinkle it on the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. And the reason being they're going to sprinkle it on the mercy seat is symbolic of casting their sin on the mercy seat. And God will show them mercy. And mercy is God withholding what they deserve. And that's why they sprinkle on the mercy seat. And then in verse 16, then he's going to cleanse. Then he's going to cleanse the holiest of holies and the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall take and he shall make an atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the children of Israel, and because of their transgression and all their sins. And so shall he do for the tabernacle of the congregation that remaineth among them in the midst of their uncleanness. Now, in the congregation of the tabernacle said, no, you got the holiest of holies where the curtain is, then you got the congregation tabernacle that would be in front, outside of the holiest of holies. And so what you see here, he's going to cleanse the holy place, and he also will cleanse the tabernacle. Now we're seeing all this right here. I don't miss it now. on this holy and sacred day. They still observe it to this very day. But today they call it Yom Kippur, and they just observed it on this past Thursday, on the 16th of September. But what I want you to put out here is this right here. Now, this is the image of God trying to press in their minds and on their hearts that every time someone sinned, every single time that something had to die, the wages of sin is death. But so now on this holy and sacred day, the priests, they have been cleansed. The nation has been cleansed. The holiest of holies has been cleansed. And the tabernacle congregation has been cleansed. But that's still a problem. The veil that separates the holiest of holies still remains. See, just like God instituted the Day of Atonement, on the night when Jesus was betrayed, he instituted the Lord's Supper, which is our Day of Atonement, when he himself became our sacrifice, and he offered himself to pay our ransom for our sin. And then he also became our scapegoat to take away our sin. And the reason why it remained under the old covenant, under the old covenant, because Hebrews 10:4 said it was impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. So what they could not do, Christ did. And when he offered himself, he ripped the veil from top to bottom. So the veil no longer stands. That's Matthew 27:51. And so what the blood of bulls and goats could not do, Christ did. He ripped the veil from top to bottom. And you know how he did it? He did it for love. So the next time that you observe the Lord's Supper, remember, at great cost, because something had to die. I remember some 20 years ago going to the theater to see this movie, The Passion of Christ. It was about the condemning and crucifixion of Christ. And I remember those images, those beatings. They were just so horrific that it traumatized me. And it probably did the same for you too. And I remember saying, I never want to see that again. And from that day to this, I had never seen that movie again. And so the next time you observe the Lord's Supper, remember, at great cost. And when you remember at great cost that we have salvation, it should inspire us. It should ignite us. It should excite us to love our fellow brothers and sisters just a little bit more. The next time we observe the Lord's Supper and we realize that Christ, because of love, gave himself to atone for our sin, and he ripped the veil from top to bottom, and he did it for love. So the next time we observe the Lord's Supper, let us remember, it should excite us it should inspire us to love our brothers and our sisters just a little bit more. Because as he ripped the veil down, we should be able to remove the veil of hatred, bitterness, division, racism, and love our brothers and sisters just a little bit more. And so, and remember, the next time you observe the Lord's Supper, and you have this, remember those images of those beatings, of those, and all those scarring. It was just how traumatizing it was. Remember that. Because even when you observe it and you realize that you have salvation, but remember, at great cost. And so, and even though our heart want to say, oh, happy day when Jesus washed my sins away, remember, at great cost. And don't forget this too, that's what I want you to remember here. Now remember, and every time when we hear, no, God, remember, everybody's created their own God. So not necessarily speaking of the God, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so, and as we close the Day of Atonement, we have all been reconciled. We are all back in fellowship, but remember, at great cost. And that concludes our lesson for today. And I want to thank all of you in the sanctuary and all those who are watching by way of social media, and wishing you all a wonderful and blessed day. Thank you.